Hey everyone, I'm Andrea Canning coming to you from the 19th floor of 30 Rockefeller, our Dateline offices. And I'm here to talk about a case that has an update like I've never seen before. This is a case that happened around a decade ago. A young upstate New York mother was found dead on the side of the road. As police started investigating, they discovered that she'd been immersed in an online game about ladies and lords, and they wondered if perhaps she had met up with someone from the game who had killed her. But as they continued looking into this murder, it brought them much closer to home, and they discovered a shocking, shocking secret. And this update has a wild conclusion that no one saw coming. We hope you can join us for the next Dateline.
These are videos humans were never meant to see. This is Nicholas Cruz, who's an American school shooter. He went to Parkland High School in Florida where he shot 34 people, killing 17, and injuring 17 others on February 14th, 2018. The video I'm about to show you is him in prison talking to his brother, not long after he was arrested after committing this horrible act. The video is just disturbing and kind of sad because imagine this is you talking to your brother who just killed 17 people in a school.
You're only 19, dude. You know how many years you had ahead of you? You know how many years you had? Years. You're still stuck in your teenage mindset and you did this dumb shit. You're not thinking about your future.
I still care for you.
What? I still love you.
Still love you too.
Bro, like, I mean, I wish I could have prevented this. Cause I feel like this is a big part of, like, my fault also, cause, you know, we grew up together, like, I know I was the nicest to you. I know I probably made you feel like shit, and you told me that, I'm pretty sure that you told me that I made you want to kill yourself or something. And I'm sorry that I grew up being a dumb jerk to you.
Disturbing things you didn't know about Richard Ramirez. He gouged out Maxine Cesara's eyes after brutally murdering her and her husband. Her eyes were never located, and in court he actually laughed as they were describing the crime scene. In childhood, his father would tie him to a cross in a graveyard as a form of punishment. His trial was already bizarre, and the trial was delayed when one of the jurors was fatally shot following a dispute with her boyfriend. When Phyllis Singletary failed to show up to juror deliberations, that's when the court found out that she'd been murdered. Richard Ramirez had nasty teeth. In one of his stolen cars, they found a business card for a dentist office. And when they called, they found out that he'd been in for x-rays and was scheduled to come back. And this is so frustrating. The police officers set up a button that the employees could press to discreetly alert them once Richard walked in. And they did, but for whatever reason, it didn't alert them. So the appointment ended and he walked away. Because of the brutality and lack of remorse, he was sentenced to 19 death sentences. But he died of cancer at San Quentin Prison in 2013, which means he was imprisoned at the same time and place as Scott Peterson. I wonder if they ever talked. If you have a case you'd like me to talk about, let me know in the comments and follow for more.
This is what we know about the awful case of 16-year-old Shelby Benny. Shelby was a cheerleader at Bixby High School, and on Thursday night, her family was on their way home with her dad behind the wheel. He had reportedly been drinking, and according to her mom, they were also having a heated argument up in the front seats. At 70 miles per hour, he tried to pass another vehicle in a no-passing zone, and their SUV flipped. As we know, Shelby was tragically ejected from her family's vehicle on impact. A bystander immediately ran over to the scene, but there aren't even words for what happened next. Shelby's father was reportedly standing disoriented just outside of the crashed car, and when asked if anyone was hurt, he ran away. He left his 16-year-old daughter there to die on the pavement. Now, according to police, they were able to determine that Elliot had fled to a local family-owned business, and it was there that he got access to another car. They were able to electronically track that vehicle, and within 12 hours, they found him behind the wheel in a town about an hour away. It was obviously too late to give him a DUI test, but he was taken into custody. With Elliot's arrest, we know that while he tried to tell police he skidded on an oil spot, he's also admitted to taking a few swigs of the vodka bottle that was found in the front seat. Today, Elliot is charged with first-degree manslaughter, but he has already posted his $100,000 bail. And as for Shelby's mom and her siblings, again, unfortunately, we don't know how they're doing now. Shelby is described as a bright light with a heart of gold and the best teammate you could ask for. If you would like to support her family during this time, the link will be in my bio.
A lot of people are saying that The Iron Claw might be the saddest movie they've seen in a long time. But the real life story that it's based on is so tragic, they had to cut the saddest storyline out. The movie is about the Von Erich family, a real-life wrestling family who tragically lost 5 of the 6 sons, all due to illness, accident, and self-infliction. But you'll notice on the movie poster, only 4 of the sons are featured. Also, I talk a lot about the dark stories behind TV and film, so you should follow along. And that's because the oldest brother died in childhood from being electrocuted, though he is referenced in the movie. But it's also because the movie doesn't include one of the brothers, one who had an incredibly tragic storyline, Chris Von Erich. Chris wanted to be a wrestler just like his brothers, even though he was much smaller than them. His brothers all grew to be over 6'2", and Chris never grew beyond 5'5". Chris also had asthma, and the medication he took made his bones really brittle, meaning that they would often break. In 1984, his brother David died suddenly in a hotel room in Japan at the age of 25 after his intestines ruptured. And then in 1987, his brother Mike took his own life. Mike suffered brain damage after he got toxic shock syndrome from a routine surgery, and it left him unable to wrestle. The loss of his brother sent Chris into a deep depression, and ultimately he took his life at just 21 years old. The director came forward and said that he tried to blend the stories of Mike and Chris into the movie because he didn't think it would get made if he included all of the brother stories, because it would almost be too unbelievable. And while I really did enjoy the movie, it made me sad for Chris because ultimately I don't want his story to be lost to history.
You will never go near the woods again if you watch this documentary. It is about hunters and people who specialize in being in the wilderness who just vanish without a trace. And I'm not talking like they wander into the woods and just go missing. In one of these cases, a guy went into the woods with a group of his friends and they went hunting. He was only about a couple of feet away from them when suddenly they turned around and he was gone. In many of these cases, massive search parties are released to try to find these people, and they are never found. A couple of theories are discussed in this doc, like paranormal theories, Sasquatch theories, ideas that maybe they fell into crevasses. If trained professionals are going missing in the wilderness, you bet your ass I'm not going anywhere near the woods. Let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced anything weird in the wilderness, and hit follow for more docs to watch.
The man behind me is Sheldon Johnson, who was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he just got arrested for murder. Not only did he murder somebody, he dismembered them and put them in a freezer. Yes, another body in a freezer story, I know guys. He previously spent 25 years in prison for attempted murder, and he was also in a gang. This case is very ironic because he went on this podcast to explain how he turned his life around and how he's a good man now. Neighbors reported hearing gunshots and then saw Sheldon Johnson coming back and forth to his apartment bringing various cleaning supplies. So we can put 2 and 2 together. He killed the person and tried to cover up the murder scene with cleaning products. Classic. Upon searching the apartment, they found the man's torso, legs, arms, and even his head in the freezer. Sheldon Johnson also spent time with the Queen's Defender's Office. The office helps people reform their lives and get away from a life of crime. And while Sheldon was on the Joe Rogan podcast, he said prison either brings out the best or the worst in you. I'm sure he will face life in prison for this. If not life, probably 25 or 30 years. Let me know what you guys think about this case in the comment section below, and as always, these videos are for informational purposes only.
Oh, you're so traumatized, it makes me want to cry. You dumb bitch.
The case referred to in that video was the case surrounding killer Nathaniel Bar Jonah. The one case I've never been able to get over. Nathaniel was a normal man who lived surrounded by several neighbors, but Nathaniel had a dark side. Nathaniel would kidnap and do terrible, terrible things to several different children. Zachary Ramsey would end up being one of the people that Nathaniel kidnapped that people made an uproar about. He was an entire movement and everyone was trying to find this lost child. Shockingly enough, a few days after Zachary had gone missing, Nathaniel decided to have a little bit of a party with his friends. He invited people over and he served up burgers and sandwiches and stuff like that, and it was just a good time. Now a little while passes again and the police begin to get involved with all of these missing children cases, and they pin down their prime suspect to be Nathaniel. So they take him into custody. But there's one part of this whole thing that I'm leaving out from you guys. Remember that party I told you about that he threw? Well, Nathaniel did not use regular burger meat or lunch meat for his sandwiches and burgers. Unfortunately, the meat that was used was the flesh of these young missing children. Thankfully though, at his trial, Nathaniel would be convicted of aggravated assault, kidnapping, and assault. He would then be sentenced to 130 years in prison. It's an extremely dark case, and now you understand why I made this video.
Did you lie and then I realized you're just as naive as I am.
This 11-year-old boy died after doing a new dangerous TikTok trend. This is Tommy Lee Billington, and he recently died after doing a very dangerous TikTok trend. Tommy Lee, who was 11 years old, was found unresponsive at a friend's house on Saturday after taking part in a dangerous trend called chroming. which is when someone inhales toxic chemicals such as paint, solvent, aerosol cans, and cleaning products. Tommy Lee was then rushed to the hospital about midday before being pronounced dead shortly after. Tommy Lee's heartbroken grandmother, Tina Burns, said he was killed attempting the TikTok challenge that had already killed 2 teenage girls. She said, and I quote, "He died instantly after a sleepover at a friend's house. The boys had tried the TikTok craze." Tommy Lee went into cardiac arrest immediately and died right then and there. The hospital did everything to try and bring him back, but nothing worked. He was sadly gone. Tommy Lee's mother is now begging other parents not to let their kids use the social media app TikTok, saying, "This costed my son his life from trying something other kids are doing." But then again, it's not hard for an 11-year-old to understand that inhaling toxic chemicals isn't good. Now, you can blame TikTok for this, but you can also blame the people that were around him, probably peer pressuring him, or he could have been the one that wanted to do it. All in all, it's extremely unfortunate what happened to Tommy Lee, and I urge every single one of you to not do this new challenge called chroming, because as you can see, it can be fatal. This is by far one of the worst work accidents ever, and whatever you do, never look up the video. The video that I'm about to explain to you has left many people traumatized, so whatever you do, don't go looking for it. The video is pretty short, coming in at 52 seconds in length, and it's not known where in Russia this took place. And it's a mystery to how this footage made its way onto the internet. As you play the video, you see a man walk towards the lathe machine, which he assumes is off. The man is wearing baggy clothes and some kind of jacket, and wearing loose clothing around a lathe machine is a no-no, since it can be sucked up into the machine, as this man found out. After the man approaches the machine, he seems to reach over it, but the rotating pole seems to get stuck on one of his sleeves, and it then drags the man into the machine. Initially, it doesn't kill the man. Instead, it traps his arm around the rotating pole, and the machine appears to have stopped. But after a couple seconds, the machine seems to start again, and this time dragging the poor man's entire body into the machine, rotating it around and around and around. As his limbs hit the ground after each rotation, you see red mist appear, and after a few more seconds, chunks of flesh and body parts start to fly off the machine. A man then walks into the shot, and he sees what's happening to his coworker. And with a look of shock, he quickly turns off the machine, but it was too late. His coworker's body has been completely torn apart into multiple pieces, and the machine is a bloody mess. There are a collection of still images from the aftermath of the incident which shows how unrecognizable the man's body is. In one photo, you see what appears to be a tibia with no flesh around it lying on the ground. And in another photo, you see the victim's severed and crushed head underneath the machine. It's absolutely disturbing and awful to look at. This video is hard to explain and hard to watch. It's extremely gruesome and disturbing, and I really don't recommend looking for it. Nobody knows what happened to these girls, and this is the last photo ever taken of them. 2 young girls pose for a selfie in front of the wild nature of Panama. The 2 girls are Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, Dutch travelers who were hiking a trail in Panama. They set off for their hike on April 1st at 11 a.m. Unfortunately, on April 2nd, they did not turn up for an appointment, and the parents of the girls stopped receiving the daily texts they had been getting in the past. On April 6th, the parents arrived in Panama along with a full police search. The forest would be completely searched and combed for 10 days, but nothing was found. 10 weeks later, a woman handed in a blue backpack. The backpack belonged to Lisanne, and inside were personal belongings including a camera and their phones. The phones had evidence of emergency numbers having been dialed only hours after the girls started their hike. But due to the lack of reception, the calls did not connect. Lisanne's phone died on April 4th, and Chris's phone would be turned on randomly between the 5th and the 11th of April, but the incorrect pin was entered or no pin was entered each time. On the camera, 90 flash photos were taken between 1 and 4 a.m. in the complete darkness of the jungle. One disturbing image shows the back of Chris's head with blood on her hair. 2 months after the backpack was discovered, a pelvis and a foot inside a boot were discovered, along with other remains. These were later DNA tested and confirmed to belong to Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon. What happened to them still remains a mystery to this day. Just imagine being in the middle of the jungle at night and you don't know what's happening. Your life is in danger and you have no service. I could only imagine the fear and anxiety these 2 girls were feeling in this moment. May Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon rest in peace.
sometimes true for stranger than fiction. The case of Richard Trenton Chase is a story which even the most depraved horror writer would struggle to create. Over the course of 4 weeks spanning across 1977 and 1978, Richard Chase took the lives of 6 innocent victims in Sacramento, California. His murders gradually progressed in violence, beginning with drive-by shootings and culminating in acts of cannibalism.
Who else worked for Jeffrey Epstein? That's a question that I've always had, and it's obviously impossible to run such a high-profile sex trafficking ring by yourself with just another woman. Well, let's start with these two men who are currently being sued for their involvement in the sex trafficking ring. This is Darren Indyke, Jeffrey Epstein's personal attorney, and this is Richard Kahn, Jeffrey Epstein's in-house accountant and executor of his estate. So a recent lawsuit by a number of victims is claiming that these two helped facilitate this entire sex trafficking operation. Obviously, there had to be a lot of different moving parts to this operation, and the people in this suit are claiming that Richard and Darren paid hush money, threatened people and their families, and tried as hard as they could to keep everybody involved silent. The plaintiffs in the lawsuit are also claiming that Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer and accountant gave him access to an abundance of cash to help him run his sex ring. In the lawsuit, these victims also claim that Jeffrey Epstein had a room inside of his $77 million Manhattan mansion that doubled as a surveillance room. Apparently, this room inside of the mansion was manned by somebody 24/7, and this person's job was to record and capture everything that was going on there. This, I can assume, was Jeffrey Epstein's attempt to capture video and audio incriminating people he was involved with in criminal, disturbing, disgusting activity. And that once again makes me ask the question, what happened to the tapes? What happened to all these recordings? What happened to all of that stuff? And all of the different people that worked for Epstein, like let's say we're talking about right now, this person who was hired to watch these security cameras 24/7. It's known that some of these disgusting trafficking acts and assaults occurred at Epstein's mansion. Who's the person who was running those cameras and watching those tapes? Where are they now? Why haven't they come forward? Why isn't the government going after them? It's just another disturbing and frankly disgusting facet of this already just mind-blowingly dark web of lies and deceit. This TikToker named Bethany Martin was arrested after stealing jewelry off a corpse. I am not kidding, this story actually happened in Texas in 2021, so let's look into it. So that video that I showed you was a real video that 17-year-old Bethany Martin made and posted on TikTok. So obviously this would be a concerning video to see just from the beginning, but when you learn the details of what happened when they found said body, you're going to be disturbed. So on July 26, 2021, Bethany Martin, who was 17 at the time, and a 16-year-old friend of hers went out for a walk. While they were on this walk through a recently developed neighborhood, they saw something strange in a drainage ditch and went to go check it out. And what they found was the body of 25-year-old Marcus Adams, pictured here. He had recently passed away after taking his own life in the area, and his corpse was just down there in the drainage ditch. No one had found him yet. So, a normal person would call the police, right? But no, not Bethany and her friend. So what they ended up doing was stealing jewelry from the dead man's body. So the girls actually reached down and unhooked a medallion and a gold necklace from Marcus's neck. And while they were doing all of this, they filmed it and posted it on their Snapchat story. This was a public video that anybody that was friends with them could watch. And there is footage of this out there. It's extremely disturbing, so obviously I'm not going to put any of it in here. But yeah, and when you watch the video, you can tell that they're not treating this seriously. They're laughing, they're making jokes, saying, "Oh, I can't believe we're doing this, ha ha ha," laughing. I'm like, they're robbing a dead body. And then they post these TikToks. So after that video from Snapchat began circulating, it eventually worked its way into the hands of the police, and Bethany and her friend were taken into custody. From the outside looking in, Bethany seemed like a totally normal girl. And like I said before, she was a TikToker. She had 50,000 followers. But now she's been charged with robbing a corpse or grave. I couldn't find anything online about whatever actually came out of this, but if anybody knows the resolution or the end to the story, please let me know.
This is Yosemite's Half Dome hike. It gains 4,500 feet in elevation, and it is 14 to 16 miles round trip. Since 2015, 20 people have died here, and also since 2015, there have been 300 accidents. One of the most common ways to summit the Half Dome is through these cables, and Yosemite offers 250 passes per day per season, or there is the lottery, which is 50 passes. The reason they started doing the passes and permits is to limit the accidents that happen here, but Since they've started it, the numbers have not gone down. This is Danielle Burnett. In 2019, she decided to hike the Half Dome cables when it began to drizzle. I'm going to read what a witness shared. She wasn't outside of the cables, but she was 30 feet above us. We heard a commotion. She started to freak out. It had started to sprinkle. She decided to turn around before making it to the top. Her group of 3 or 4 others continued on. I saw her slip on the rock. It wasn't that wet yet, so maybe she had poorly chosen a pair of shoes. Regardless, I watched her slip on the rock and fall hard. She had lost her grip on the cable. She started sliding down to the right of the cables. My friend got down on her stomach and tried to grab her, but she kept sliding past. I stretched out and tried to grab her with my right hand, but by now she was probably 10 feet away from the cables and slid past me too. We watched as she screamed and went over the edge. She fell about 500 feet and you could still see her from the top of the subdome. Everyone was evacuated so the helicopter could fly in. She was found deceased on arrival. It's no wonder that this is considered one of the most dangerous hikes in America, and I'm an avid hiker and I love hiking, but I think I'm good on this one.
A Japanese teenager was brutally tortured and gang raped for 44 days before her body was dumped in a drum of wet concrete. On November 25th in 1988, 17-year-old Junko Furuta was biking home from a waitressing shift in Tokyo when 18-year-old Nobuharu Minato kicked her off her bike out of the blue and ran away. A 16-year-old named Hiroshi Miyano came to her aid and offered to walk her home. Little did she know this was a trap. Hiroshi ended up attacking Junko, raping her twice before calling that first guy, Minato, back, and then 2 other friends came who persuaded him to keep her in captivity. Here is when those 44 days of brutality would begin, and a trigger warning here, things are really about to get graphic. They held her in an empty house belonging to Nobuharu's parents, and there the boys would regularly gang rape her, torture her, and beat her. And not just the 4 of them, the teens invited other men back to the house with the express purpose of assaulting her. According to their own statements, they would force Junko to smoke and consume large amounts of alcohol. Then they would do things like douse her in lighter fluid and burn her, sodomize her, and starve her. She became so malnourished that she couldn't walk, and her burns and cuts were so infected that she became confined to the floor. Her poor little face was mangled to the point where you couldn't discern her features anymore. And while she was still alive, her body reportedly started to rot. On the 44th day, Hiroshi was in a foul mood because he lost a board game and he took it out on Junko. He doused her in lighter fluid and ignited it, and this is not the worst part. Over the next 2 hours, the boys excessively beat her. They made her drink her own urine. She was having convulsions. They repeatedly dropped an iron exercise ball on top of her until she succumbed to her injuries. They then wrapped Junko's mutilated body in blankets, shoved it in a travel bag, and then put that inside of a 55-gallon drum, which they then filled with concrete. They also threw in a videotape of the last episode of her favorite show because she said she had never gotten to watch it and they didn't want her to haunt them. The boys got caught, and after a police interview, cops found Junko's body inside that drum and were able to identify her through her fingerprints. Hiroshi only got 20 years in jail. 2 of the others, a minimum of 5, and the last guy just 8 years in juvie.
This is Jellyfish Arms, one of the worst prison videos ever, explained. Before I begin, I just want to say this video is an extremely hard watch and I don't recommend looking for it. The video that I'm about to explain is under 1.5 minutes long, and as you play the video, you see a steel barred jail cell which looks like it's holding several men. It's hard to see what's going on, but it appears multiple men are straining and holding down one man. On the outside of the cell are 3 inmates. 2 are holding what appears to be 2 thick wooden sticks or metal pipes. It's hard to tell because of the quality, but I think it's 2 metal pipes. It's hard to explain, but the man who is being held down has his arms extended through the prison bars. To visualize it, picture yourself in a jail cell and sticking your arms through the bars and extending your arms out. One of the men outside of the cell is holding a rope that is tied to the victim's arm, and he is pulling it tightly so that the arm is completely outstretched and straight. The 2 men with the metal pipes then start hitting the victim's outstretched arm. After every hit, you see lumps appear on the arm almost instantly. They are hitting him so hard and often that lacerations appear. The screaming from the victim gets more and more intense, and after several strikes, the man holding the rope reduces the tension and shakes the victim's arm. You can see that he has several bones broken in his forearm, and his arm is partially floppy at this point. It's worth noting that a bed sheet has been placed and pulled over the victim's head in order to reduce the screaming. Once again, they strike the same arm several more times. The man holding the rope then unties the arm as the prisoner pulls it back into the cell. His forearm is completely floppy and he struggles to even pull it through the cell bars. And as you guessed, it doesn't get any better from here. They then take the other arm, tie it up, and pull it through the cell bars once again so the arm is outstretched. They then strike the arm multiple times, and despite the loud nature of the inmates and their attempt to muffle the victim's screams, you can still hear them, and that mixed with the sound the metal bar makes when it hits the victim's arm is just sickening. At 1 minute and 26 seconds into the video, it finally concludes. This is a terrible watch, and there's little to no backstory behind it, but many speculate it was just a normal gang attack, but others say it was a punishment for stealing in prison, which makes sense as they were incapacitating his arms. Regardless, it's a very sickening video, and I don't recommend watching it.
This pair did on Christmas Eve is like something out of a horror film. It was Christmas in Washington State in 2007. Families were gathering together in anticipation of the big day and sharing gifts. However, 29-year-old Michelle Anderson and her boyfriend had an entirely different idea of what they would do during the festive season. Michelle's boyfriend was Joseph McEnroe. The pair headed over to Michelle's family home on Christmas Eve. Michelle was reportedly angry with her parents as they had recently requested that she started paying rent. At 29 years old, they felt that she needed to start contributing to the household. The home was in a rural area and Michelle had her own space in a caravan on her parents' land. So far, she'd been living there for free. Michelle and her boyfriend armed themselves and headed to the home that afternoon. When they arrived, her parents, Judy and Wayne, were sat there wrapping gifts. Joseph distracted Judy while Michelle tried to shoot her dad. However, the gun jammed, so Joseph took over and shot both parents. The pair then took the bodies outside and cleaned the house. They knew some visitors were on the way. It wasn't long before Michelle's 32-year-old brother Scott and his wife Erica would arrive. They also had with them their 2 children, 5-year-old Olivia and 3-year-old Nathan. They'd all been excited to spend Christmas with their family, not realizing they wouldn't even make it to Christmas Day. Michelle shot Scott and killed him. The pair then both shot Erica, who fell to the ground injured. She managed to crawl her way to the phone and ring police. Dispatchers could reportedly hear a horrifying scene going on in the background of the call. That was until Joseph snatched the phone off Erica and smashed it on the ground. He then shot her again, killing her. He then shot and killed the 2 innocent children because he apparently didn't want them to be scarred for life. Infuriatingly, when police arrived at the property, they found the gate was locked, so they simply left. It wasn't until Boxing Day that the massacre was uncovered. Judy's best friend had arrived to investigate when she didn't turn up for work. Peering through the window, she saw 2 dead bodies on the floor and rang police. Michelle and Joseph were questioned and admitted to the killings. Michelle said she was angry about being asked for rent and also angry at her brother for owing her money. They were both given life in prison.
The case of the Dardeen family was one that was deemed too gruesome for news stations and daytime television shows such as Oprah, and to this day, nearly 25 years later, it still remains unsolved. The family consisted of 29-year-old Russell Keith, wife Ruby Elaine, who was 30 and 7 months pregnant at the time, and their 3-year-old son, who they had named Peter. The growing family had recently moved to the small town of Ina, Illinois in 1986 and were living in a rented-out trailer near Route 37, and though this was a small town, it did not have a reputation for being the safest. During the past 2 years, this small town had experienced 15 homicides, including that of a 10-year-old girl that had recently been murdered in the area. This had left everyone in the town, including the Dardeens, on edge, and in fact, when a woman had approached the trailer asking for help one night, Keith would flat out deny her and ask her to leave the property. The family had felt so unsafe here that Keith had told his mother, Joanne Dardeen, that regardless if he had a job lined up or not, he and the family would be moving out of the small town by the end of the year. But then came the night of November 17th, 1987. Keith, who had always been described as a reliable worker, had failed to show up to work that night, and after workers and family had failed to reach either him or Elaine, they decided to contact the police. Keith's father had agreed to meet with officials at the Dardeen residence, unaware of the horrors that they were about to discover. There is a major trigger warning for the rest of this episode, but once Keith's father and officials had made their way into the household, they would discover 3 bodies that were tucked inside Keith and Elaine's bed. The bodies had belonged to that of Elaine, their 3-year-old son Peter, and the newborn infant that Elaine had given birth to during the attack. All had been found deceased in the bed. Keith's body was nowhere to be found within the house, and much to the shock of the family, this led investigators to believe him to be the prime suspect in this case. But that theory would be put to rest when just the very next day, a group of hunters would find Keith Dardeen's body about a mile away from their trailer. He had been found, shot 3 times, and then sexually mutilated. His car would also later be found right in front of the police department in that town. The town immediately began to swirl with rumors, as over 30 detectives had to chase down over 1,000 leads, but unfortunately those leads really came to nothing. There was no sign of an affair, drug use or drug selling, or any type of gambling debt that the family could have had, and this went on for years until one solid lead came up, which I'll have to make in a part 2.
Hammer coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
It honestly blows my mind that there was an NFL player that killed multiple people while actively playing in the NFL and making millions of dollars and playing in front of thousands of fans. Just a few months after the Patriots lost to the Giants in the Super Bowl in 2012, 2 men were shot leaving a club. According to witnesses, these 2 men bumped into NFL star Aaron Hernandez. Literally bumped into him and spilled some of their drink on him. And he took this so personally. Let me add, Aaron Hernandez was acquitted for this, but I feel like in order for everything else to make sense, then this had to have been true. Because after this, he shot and partially blinded his friend Alexander Bradley, person who said he was driving when Aaron committed the double homicide. And meanwhile, Aaron is still playing for the Patriots. And then in the summer of 2013, Odin Lloyd was found shot about a mile from Aaron Hernandez's mansion. And this man was his friend and actually dating Aaron's fiance's sister. Motives for these murders were never really established. Literally since adolescence, Aaron had always had behavioral problems and was always trying to be that big tough guy who wanted to get into fights. Growing up, there was fighting constantly in the Hernandez home, and Aaron was physically abused by his father. And he was also SA'd by a babysitter at just 6 years old. And his dad died prematurely. Childhood trauma is very common in criminals, but police also speculated that it could be other things, including repressed gay feelings. I'm not sure why they made this such a big part of the trial because Aaron was definitely homophobic in the way that he'd talk about things. The motive for killing Odin Lloyd was never truly decided, but people think that he either knew about Aaron's sexuality or he knew about the 2012 double homicide. But one of his childhood friends came out and he said that the 2 of them did experiment with each other physically. So going back to that 2012 double homicide, people were saying that maybe Aaron thought that these 2 guys were trying to come on to him in the club. But I think the cause was another kind of brain. During his football career, Aaron had been tackled a lot. And even in high school, he'd been knocked unconscious for long periods of time. And any kind of head injury that makes you black out is a serious one. And Aaron really did show lapses in logic and decision making because he really acted like this was a world with no consequences. So Aaron was in prison for a few years and did actually end up taking his own life. Head injuries are a common threat among murderers, which I talked about in my serial killer series. Scientists said that Aaron had the worst case of CTE they'd ever seen. Above is a healthy brain, and on the bottom you can see how much smaller Aaron's brain was. The doctors said they'd literally never seen brain damage this bad on someone under the age of 46, and Aaron was just 27. Aaron had lost a lot of brain tissue due to CTE, including parts that control memory, judgment, decision-making, and emotion. But I also don't think that he had done any kind of processing or therapy for the abuse that he suffered as a child, and that would strongly impact him in becoming a violent individual. I found the story to be so fascinating, and if you'd like to hear more about theories or about just the general playing out of events, let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching and follow for more.